Welcome back to KNN, the Kozik News Network. Breaking news in Atlanta, Georgia. The mayor has surrendered his city to the Union. We have two reporters on the scene. Over to you, Maya and Mia.
Today is September 2nd, and we are currently standing in Atlanta, Georgia with some breaking news.
Just 1.5 months ago, on the 22nd of July, a battle broke out between the Union and the Confederates right here in Atlanta. And earlier today, the mayor and citizens of Atlanta have finally surrendered the city to the Union.
The two opposing sides met here in July, the Union Army being led by William T. Sherman and the Confederate Army being led by General Joseph E. Johnston.
After the Union Army arrived in Atlanta from Tennessee, the Confederate Army fled due to being outnumbered and fought defensively as they retreated.
Confederate General Johnston was soon replaced by General Bell Hood. Hood decided to fight back on July 20th when he attempted to push back one of Sherman's three armies located at Peachtree Creek.
Although the Union suffered a great damage from this attack, about 1,700 casualties, they held their position and inflicted even more damage on the Confederates with at least 2,500 casualties.
Hood remained determined. 2 days later, he sent a large group of his men at night to attack the left flank of the Union Army. Although they met the opposing side by surprise, the Union Army was able to fight Confederate divisions head-on.
Throughout the day, the Confederates tried to launch a series of attacks to dislodge the Union Army, but even by sundown, they were not successful in doing so.
The last full battle that took place was initiated by Hood on July 28th, but his troops were once again defeated at Ezra Church, in which the Union lost 632 men, while the Confederates lost about 3,000 men.
Total casualties were 3,722 from the Union and 5,500 from the Confederates.
The importance of this conflict was not only the casualties, but also its immense influence on the surrounding environment of Atlanta.
Yes, as a result of the heavy artillery fire, Atlanta was left in utter ruin, leaving many families with destroyed homes and lack of resources, which had been used up by the soldiers.
To share some insight into the experience, we had descriptions of Major Thomas T. Taylor fighting on the side of the Confederates during the Battle of Atlanta.
Taylor explains, "There I sat under a big oak tree, only 600 yards from the main line of enemy works, from which solid shot was being thrown and case and shells too, with fearful rapidity at and over us."
Here we can understand just how much the city of Atlanta was turned into a battleground. As Taylor adds, 2 columns moved up on our right, and we were both, after heavy fire, severely repulsed, and took refuge behind some outbuildings and a large white house, where they reformed.
They used everything from ravines to yard and garden fences to protect themselves from the enemy's bullets.
After this battle was over, General Sherman sent small groups west and south to cut off supply lines to the city. Then, on September 1st, after destroying munitions train so that the enemies could not make use of it, Hood finally pulled out of the city, leaving the mayor and citizens to surrender Atlanta to the Union the next day.
In a recent telegram, General Sherman is quoted saying that Atlanta is ours and fairly won.
And that's the latest from Atlanta. Back to you at the studio.
Thank you for the update. We will keep you posted here at the Kozik News Network. Welcome back. Here we have our two reporters, Maya and Mia, to discuss the events of Sherman's March to the Sea and its effects on the environment.
It was 1864 and the Civil War was entering its 4th year, and the end did not seem soon.
The North, though, changed one thing. They made it so all Union forces were on the same page, working together.
Yes, a very important point indeed. Ulysses S. Grant was made lieutenant commander of all Union forces, and William T. Sherman would take over Grant's former command as military division of the Mississippi.
It is right to say, is it not, that Grant and Sherman are friends and work well together?
Well, yes, it is. They had been friends for many years previous to these appointments, and it only seems fit that they would work well together and agree.
Yes, they both agreed that their strategy should be to move in on the South from the East and West simultaneously, and that would severely hurt the Confederacy.
They also agreed that one of their main goals, besides defeating the Confederate armies, would be to destroy Confederate resources and their means of transportation, their railroads.
In Sherman's march to sea, his first stop was Atlanta. There, his job was to crush the Confederate Army of Tennessee that was led by General Joseph Johnston.
But the battle didn't go as well as it planned.
Oh, that is a short sentence. Okay. The first battle was 7 hours long, and Sherman lost 3,000 men at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain.
Sherman quickly learned it was better to outflank the Confederate army and destroy Confederate resources rather than have another bloody head-on battle like the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain.
On December 2nd, at the Battle of Jonesboro, Sherman defeated Johnston and captured Atlanta.
A very important victory for the Union.
Yes, though Sherman didn't stop there. He continued his march to the sea. Sherman left Atlanta in flames, taking guns, shoes, and tents, and marched on to Savannah.
Okay, on his way, he destroyed everything in his path. He absolutely wrecked the 300-mile by 60-mile path they took to Savannah. They destroyed all railroads, bridges, and telegraph lines on the way to the sea.
They also burned all the crops and cotton on the way and emancipated all the slaves they came across.
Sherman used a strategy of using up resources his army needed and destroying what he didn't need, rather than relying on supply lines.
Sherman's wasteful strategy of using up whatever he came across left many surrounding women and children faced with starvation, along with many of their homes and properties being burned.
In the end, after Sherman completed his march to sea, he continued up north through the Carolinas and met up with General Grant to combine armies and defeat General Robert E. Lee.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you both for coming and a great report. Stay tuned here at the Kozik News Network to hear the latest updates on the Civil War. Welcome back to KNN, the Kozik News Network. We're now going to send it to Eddie and Alex, bringing you our big picture on Total War.
Hello, this is Eddie Engelman and Alex Marinan bringing you the big picture. How are you today, Alex?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Now, on to the topic.
Total war, or the usage of all available resources on the part of the nation to win a war, can be used to describe the Civil War.
It was really that bad of a war?
Unfortunately, yes. Both sides used the resources in the United States as much as they could in order to gain the upper hand, but this ended up destroying the environment.
What specifically were some of the effects of the war on the environment?
Well, some notable ones include the destruction of forests, the disruption of waterways, the wasting of natural resources, unsustainable whaling and hunting practices, draining of wetlands, and the loss of topsoil and the disturbance of erosion patterns.
Wow, that's a lot of negative effects. So you said their trees suffered a lot in the Civil War.
Oh, no doubt about it. One of the most obvious examples of this was the Battle of Franklin, fought in November of 1864 in Franklin, Tennessee, which resulted in one of the worst disasters for the Confederates during the Civil War.
Whoa, that is crazy. But how does this relate to your earlier point about the entire war being destructive and detrimental for the environment?
Don't worry, I'm getting to that. Not only did the Battle of Franklin represent a devastating loss for the Confederacy, but it caused widespread environmental destruction to the forested areas in and around the battlefield. Soldiers who fought in this battle described the scene after the battle. A small grove of about 200 locust trees, most of them about the size of a common bedpost. These little trees were literally cut to pieces by the bullets. Some of them, not as large as a man's body, had 50 to 60 bullet marks.
That's a lot of bullets to be spending on locust trees. It sounds like neither army was very conscious of the immense damage they were inflicting on the environment.
I couldn't agree more. That same soldier even notes that a reward of $25 had been offered by several officers to any person who will find in that grove a tree or limb 5 feet long which had not been struck by a bullet.
Considering that account we just heard, I doubt anyone went home rich that night. Back to what you were saying earlier. There are numerous examples of battles just like the Battle of Franklin that were fought during the Civil War, killing thousands upon thousands of trees in their crossfire.
Right you are. In fact, the historian Megan Kate Nelson estimates that 2 million trees were taken nationwide during the Civil War to support the troops in building encampments and supplying firewood.
Wait a minute. Did I hear you right? 2 million trees taken just to make forts and provide firewood? That's insane. Now that I think about it, that doesn't even include the thousands upon thousands of trees destroyed by the armies.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Not only did both armies destroy thousands of trees in their quest for power, but they also chopped down 2 million trees to use in the war for things like heat and shelter.
And trees were not the only thing in the environment that suffered as a result of the Civil War. The loss of topsoil across the United States at the time was massive.
Sorry, let me stop you there for just a second. What is topsoil?
I honestly didn't know about it until recently. But topsoil is crucial for storing the water and nutrients that agricultural crops and native plants need to survive.
Sounds like something we should be protecting, considering how important farming is and was for the United States.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But this was definitely not the case during the Civil War. One of the best examples we have of this is the Battle of the Crater.
Crater? As in the giant hole in the ground?
Yes, sir. On July 30th, 1864, during the siege of Petersburg, the Union Army, operating under the orders of Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, exploded a super destructive mine. The goal was to blow a gap in the tough Confederate defense, allowing the Union Army to march in and wreak havoc.
Well, did that end up working?
Oh, it worked all right, though possibly a little bit too well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the explosions did kill 278 Confederate soldiers instantaneously. And not only that, the explosion even rendered thousands of the soldiers who survived the blast essentially useless for around 15 minutes as they tried to organize themselves and regain their bearings.
Well, that sounds like an overwhelming victory to me.
Well, it was a victory for the army, but the environment suffered heavily from the massive explosion. The blast created a huge depression in the earth that is still there to this very day. The hole itself was 170 feet long, 120 feet wide, and at least 30 feet deep.
Oh, so that's why it's called the Battle of the Crater.
You're correct. The battle was eventually named after the huge crater. Getting back to the effect on the environment, the massive destruction of land destroyed most of it, if not all the topsoil in the area, making it near impossible for plants to survive. Or even for man-made crops to be planted there.
Sounds awful.
Oh, it was. That reminds me. I forgot to mention that explosions were not even the only way topsoil was destroyed during the Civil War.
Well, what other way could topsoil be affected so deep in the ground?
Well, throughout the war, military operations often involved the altering of the environment, and more specifically the soil.
But how so?
The construction of earthen entrenchments, dubbed earthworks, was widespread, particularly around Washington, D.C. Some earthworks were said to be as extensive as 5 miles. Unfortunately, these trenches and passageways were dug deep into the ground, affecting the landscapes above immensely. The major problem with this was the erosion dynamics of the landscape, which caused many ecological problems in the United States during the time.
I think I know what problems you are referring to.
Well, if you guessed the loss of topsoil, then you would be correct. Moving on from the loss of topsoil, even grave digging and burying people after they fell in battle brought ecological problems.
But don't we bury people today? Why was it such a big deal back then?
Well, today there are thousands of less casualties per day or week compared to the Civil War. With an estimate of 620,000 casualties throughout the war, thousands of people were being buried at the same place at the same time after a bloody battle. This later became known as a mass grave. One soldier recalls the creation of a mass grave. In one corner, I see a large pile of arms and legs. Many already dead were lying on the grass, with blankets thrown over them. While not far distant, in the woods, a party were engaged in digging long trenches for sepulture. A mass grave can lead to guaranteed contamination and drastically change the soil structure.
Hold on. A mass grave can lead to groundwater
Oh,
contamination.
groundwater.
Yep. It's okay.
A mass grave and stuff like that.
A mass grave can lead to groundwater contamination and drastically change the soil structure and microbial characteristics.
Wow, the soil in the United States during the Civil War is taking a beating, huh?
I can't agree with that. I can't. Oh, argue. Oh my god. I can't
Wait,
argue.
stop. Just say I can't argue with that.
I can't argue with that.
Wow, it definitely sounds like total war. Not only on the armies, but also the environments. Stay tuned here for more on the Civil War.
Yeah!
Welcome back to the Kozik News Network. Today we have a special report from one of our top reporters, Alex, who is interviewing General Ulysses S. Grant about the Wilderness Campaign. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Josh. And with me right now, I have the Union General Grant.
Oh yes, that is me.
So Ulysses, how is this so-called Wilderness Campaign?
It took place in Northern Virginia in an area known as the Wilderness, which is the Orange and Spotsylvania counties. Oh, and it wasn't pretty at all. We had been fighting the Confederates, who were commanded by General Robert E. Lee, for only a few days, but it felt like years out here.
I've heard it was very bloody. How many men were lost during this battle?
It was a horrid sight to behold, and in total, around 30,000 bodies were found dead.
That sounds terrible. I hope everyone on both sides can find solace in the men lost. There have been some rumors of both sides of the war using war attrition, which is the cause of such a high body count for a battle that was not very long. Is this true?
Unfortunately, this is true. Even though the battle was only a few days, we had to use war attrition, which is a very brutal form of combat. It is a strategy to keep throwing troops out in order to overwhelm as many of their troops as we were forced to use it to assault the Southern troops.
I have also heard reports that there may have been many uses of the trees during the battle. Is this also true?
It is indeed. If we look to the forests of Northern Virginia, many trees were left dead, shot up, or burnt with no leaves. Many soldiers suffered grave injuries from forest fires, and many more lost their lives. Although many trees were destroyed during combat, many were also chopped down to use as supplies for our needs.
Was it just trees, or were there any other major impacts on the environment?
Because of the chaos and war attrition, the impact on the environment was devastating, especially to the ground surrounding the battle. The fields were left filthy with bodies spilled out and craters blown from the ground. The territory was unrecognizable with that which was there before the battle.
That sounds awful. Was there any decisive victor?
Well, ultimately no, although I was able to continue my campaign through the rest of Virginia. Many say the battle had ended in a draw, so there was no distinct winner in this one.
Thank you for your insight, Mr. Grant. Back to you, Josh.
Very interesting stuff from Ulysses S. Grant. Thank you, Alex, one of our best reporters here at KNN. Come back tomorrow for more Civil War news.